A&M sucks. Welcome back, everybody, to another edition, episode 24 of the Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports podcast. I'm your host, Michael Wein, proud graduate of the University of Texas. Live from Houston, Texas, I'm welcoming in my co-host, Nixon, for tonight's show, episode 24 of Dit Hole. Make sure you like and subscribe to our channel. I'm live doing this show either by myself or with a guest. Most of the time, that guest is that man right there in the blue collar shirt. But for rare occasions, we'll have other special guests. We're talking Texas Longhorn sports, where that's mainly football, basketball, and baseball. Excuse me. And we talk a lot of college football other than Texas on this show. How are you doing tonight, Emmy, on a nice Tuesday evening, October 17th, 2023, as Texas starts their prep for the second half of this football season? How are you doing?
I'm doing good, man. Super chill day at work. I'm starting to settle in and get back into a routine of things. And this second half of the Texas season, there's a lot to look forward to right now with the Texas season moving forward and then college basketball coming around the corner as well, which we'll get into.
Yeah. We have previewed Houston so far. We started spinning that unknown wheel that you guys have not seen yet but may see in the future live on a show. We have a bunch of teams on there. We spin it before every show, a couple days before, so we know who we're going to talk about. And a couple days ago, I spun the wheel, and just so happened it landed on that team in Austin under Rodney Terry, the Texas Longhorns. Before we get to that, though, I saw on your we haven't talked about this. I don't know if you want to talk about this on this platform, but saw on your Snapchat story a couple days ago that you got your first ever hole-in-one. Is that correct?
Yeah. 133 yards, hole 4 at Falcon Head Golf Club in Austin. 9-iron, like it was just into the wind, hit a little fade, landed basically right on the lip of the cup and bounced straight in.
Wow, congratulations to you on that. That's a very cool thing. Your first hole-in-one. That's something you'll most likely always remember if I'm guessing correctly.
I went into the clubhouse after and bought the flag that was on the pin that day. But the one thing that I kind of do regret is the fact that I was playing by myself that day. I wish I would have played with some people so I could, celebrate a little bit more. But,
it is probably kind of weird playing by yourself. I do have some orange juice tonight. I'm still recovering from a sinus infection, as I informed those of you who watched last night's Raw Rundown. I also have a glass of water. We got a lot to get to. We've got on tonight's show, or at least what we've planned, we're going to get to Texas basketball here in a second. I want to have a discussion about the challenges facing this Texas football team going into the last 6 games of the regular season. We don't know what the postseason will hold yet for this team. We can project that, but for these last 6 games, Texas, BYU, Kansas State, TCU, who are the last couple? Texas Tech, and there's one I'm forgetting. Um,
Is it Oklahoma State?
no, it's
No.
I have to look at Iowa State. It's Iowa
Okay.
State.
Yeah.
For these last 6 games, all of which Texas will undoubtedly be favored in, probably all by double digits. Even though, as we spoke to on the last Dit Hole episode, everything, despite the problems in that Oklahoma game, despite everything going against them in that Oklahoma game and all the things they did wrong in that Oklahoma game, despite all of that, everything is pretty much still in front of this Texas team, at least right now, for the rest of the season. They're probably going to meet Oklahoma again in the Big 12 championship. And if they get there at 11-1, they beat Oklahoma. They avenge their only loss. They beat them in the Big 12 championship game. They're a one-loss conference winner with a win at Alabama. And if Alabama, say, goes on to reach the SEC championship, that one's going to look even better than it did a couple of weeks ago. It depends what happens around the rest of the Pac-12, the Big Ten, and the SEC. But, I mean, they certainly have a really good shot at possibly sneaking into the playoffs. So everything is still set up very well for this Texas team. But that's not to say there aren't some things that they need to clean up and or challenges facing them throughout the next 6 weeks. So whether that be personnel, whether that be injuries, whether that be situational football, whether that be coaching, we're going to have a conversation about that. And then lastly, we're going to try to get into our top 10 power rankings at the middle of the season. Okay. Let's stop beating around the bush and let's get to this team preview for that basketball team down in Austin, Texas, who ironically just held their orange and white scrimmage tonight at Gregory Gym. It was orange versus white. Now, Dylan Dessou and Caden Shedrick, who we'll talk about here in a little bit, did not participate. There's Dessou still recovering from an injury, and Shedrick they're holding him out for injury reasons, but they just want those guys primarily to be healthy for the start of the season. They would hate for those guys to re-aggravate something in a scrimmage 2.5 weeks before the first game. But everyone else participated, so I'll talk a little bit about that. But I want to hand the floor to you. But real quick, Texas went 29-9 overall last year. 29-9. They were 12-6 in Big 12 league play. One of the hardest league to play in college basketball. 12-6, which means they won 2/3 of their league games. They beat Kansas twice. Once at the end of the regular season where they squished them, and then again in the Big 12 championship where they squished them again. They finished second in the Big 12 for the regular season, but they won the Big 12 tournament championship, which catapulted them to a run to almost the Final Four, but a run that ended, sadly, against Miami in the Elite Eight. But that was as good of a run as we've seen from this Texas basketball program in the postseason in a long, long time. So it was
It's Kevin Durant, maybe?
yeah, it was
Is
definitely a building block for this stage of the program. When you consider the circumstances that they had to deal with last year with the sudden situation with their former coach, Chris Beard, who is now at Ole Miss, it was a lot. I mean, there was a lot there. Credit to Rodney Terry and the job that they did. Now, why not? Let's first talk about what this Texas team lost. We all know. Do you have the list in front of you? Do you want to talk a little bit about what they lost and what they gained this offseason?
I don't have it as a list,
Okay.
but
It's okay. Let me run through it real fast.
they
And then
picked up Max Abmas from Oral Roberts.
Yep.
Oral Roberts, sorry.
Mhm.
That's the main one that I see.
Yeah. Real quickly. So we all know that was a really experienced team last year, experienced wins in the tournament. They lose Marcus Carr, who was a fifth-year senior. They lose Serge Rice, who was one of the best reserves in college basketball last year. No doubt about that. They lose Timmy Allen, and they lose Christian Bishop. Those were the four main contributors that Texas loses from last year. But that's not to say they didn't return anything. They lose a lot, but that's not to say they didn't return anything. They return Tyrese Hunter, who is back healthy and better for his junior year of college basketball. So if he wants it, he still has another year of eligibility after this upcoming one. They return Dylan DeSue, who's now in his last year of eligibility, but had a huge latter half of the season. We expect big things from him. And they return the glue guy from this program, Brock Cunningham, along with a couple others. They did lose a couple five-star commits that Beard got early on in the offseason, a couple higher-rated guys for this 2024 class that were committed to Beard but decided to go play pro ball either in the G League or overseas, and understandably so. It really wasn't a decision against Texas, and Rodney Terrier's more so, let me go, let's get on with things and let me go play in the G League or go play in Australia. But you did mention they also bring in Max Asmus, transfer from Oral Roberts. They bring in Caden Shedrick, big man from Virginia, to pair along with Dylan DeSue. And they bring in some other key transfers. They bring in Kendall Weaver, transfer from UT Arlington, who should be a good bench piece. They bring in Ithiel Horton, who is an excellent shooter. I believe he's a fifth-year senior, transfer from UCF, who also played at Pittsburgh early in his career. And then Zirik Onyema, power forward transfer from UTEP, who's a solid player. And then they have Chris Johnson, the freshman. We'll see how much he's able to play. But I expect him to get some minutes off the bench. So after what was a slow start to this offseason, Rodney Terry has built a really strong roster. Now we have to see how these new pieces all come together. But where's your head at? Like, with all this information that I've given you, where do you want to go first?
Well, obviously, there's a lot of, I guess, roster movement that just is natural in college basketball, obviously. But the big thing to start the year is going to be chemistry and building that chemistry. Obviously, on the offensive end, that's a big deal. But I'm not too worried about that because I think things will click offensively eventually here. I think the big thing is I like the way Texas brought in, shooting. That's the big part of Texas's renaissance as a program these last couple of years is bringing in that shooting. And on the defensive end, we know that the system in place is already there and put in, but that's where I want to see the chemistry and how sharp are they going to be in terms of defensive rotations and defending without fouling. That's going to be a big thing as well. Those are the big things to watch for, just in general.
Yeah, and how could I forget to mention Dylan Mitchell, who, to me, is the obvious, like, if he gets any sort of semblance of a consistent half-court offensive game, mainly a pull-up jumper and a respectable three-point jumper, he's the obvious, like, oh, that guy could be a top 10 pick in the NBA draft because of his athleticism, his size at 6'8", athletic, his tenacity, and what he's already proven to be on the defensive end of the floor. He he can do a lot of different things defensively. He can play some small ball 5 against certain matchups. He's still getting bigger, as in he's building some muscle, putting some muscle on his frame. But really defensive versatile, can guard guards on the perimeter, really good defender, has the length and athleticism you need to compete in the NBA. Super athletic. We know he can finish around the rim. But the one thing missing from his game has been that jump shot. And he's worked on that tirelessly in this offseason. Reports are that he hit 2 kind of fadeaway turnaround jump shots from the mid-range in tonight's scrimmage, which is a good sign. We don't know what that will mean come actual big league play, as in the Big 12. But if he can find – he didn't attempt a single 3 last year. He was not a threat as a floor spacer last year when he was on the floor. He was mainly on the floor to rebound, play defense, and when Texas got in transition, he could be there as a guy who is dangerous as a lob threat, can dunk, can finish at the rim. That was his role on last year's team. And look, for a true freshman, that's great. But for a guy that a lot of people expect to be in the NBA probably after this year, if he wants to really maximize his stock, he needs to find that jump shot. And I think that's the X factor this year for Texas.
Yeah, and not just the jumper, but also just having that feel offensively of just not only just seeing the floor and knowing how to get to his spots where he feels comfortable shooting the ball, but just some one-on-one game. Like if you're not going to take the 3-point shot off the catch in a catch and shoot situation, just driving off the catch, knowing how to do that effectively. Those are the things NBA scouts are going to look for.
Yeah, and Rodney Terry has a couple things I'm sure he can figure out, but he needs to, in these early season games where you play a couple cream puffs that Texas will beat, he's going to have to experiment with some lineups, because they do bring in Caden Shedrick, who's an excellent shot blocker, excellent rim protector, very good rebounder, and can finish around the rim. Like he dunks, he finishes around the rim. He's a rim running big. You can put him in the pick and roll. He was good at Virginia. I think he'll be even better at Texas in this system than he was under Tony Bennett. And everybody knows how much I love Tony Bennett. But what Terry needs to figure out is, how does Mitchell fit on the court with Shedrick? Again, he's a rim running 5 who really can't shoot all that well. So if you have 2 guys on the floor at the same time who can't shoot, that's going to create floor spacing issues. The same can be said for Mitchell, though, as it can be said for Dylan DeSue. We know we know Dylan DeSue's excellent from 15 feet and in. But I think with a full offseason now, although he's had to deal with some injuries, which has always been the problem for Dylan DeSue, it's never been like production on the court. He led the SEC in rebounds his his couple years at Vanderbilt. I think he played 1 or 2 years there. One of them, I think he was just completely injured with a knee injury. The one full year he played at Vanderbilt, he led that league in rebounds. We saw what he did in the tournament. He was Texas's best player flat out from the start of that tournament to the end of that tournament, aside from, I guess, Serge Jabari Rice. We all remember the Penn State game. We all remember the Sweet 16 game against who did they play in the Sweet 16? They played Miami in the – well, anyways, in that Sweet 16 game, he hurts himself, and Texas unfortunately loses him for the rest of the tournament, right? It was an ankle injury, I believe. And they
Was
lose.
it Xavier that they played?
It was Xavier. Thank you for
Okay.
remembering that. They lose the Sioux, and I'm of the personal opinion, and I think a lot of non-Texas fans are of this opinion as well, that if Texas has the Sioux in that Elite Eight game, they probably win that game. You can't say definitively because Miami played really, really good second half. But if they had the Sioux in that game, I tend to think they're able to find a way to win that game, as good as the Sioux was playing at the time. And I don't think that's outrageous to say. But if the Sioux could find, if he could knock down a couple jumpers from the outside, Shedrick's just not going to be that guy. We know what Shedrick is. They brought him in for what he is: rim protection, rebounding, pick and roll, all the dirty work, basically. The Sioux is that skilled, he's money from inside 15 feet, but one of those two guys, if not both of them, need to at least be a threat. The point being from beyond the arc, because you don't have, while I still think this Texas team will be a good shooting team and they have plenty talent to compete at the top of the Big 12, maybe not win the Big 12 because it's going to be a gauntlet. We don't know how that's going to play out yet, but they still have plenty of talent to compete with Houston, to compete with Kansas, to compete with Baylor at the top of this league. But if they want to reach their ceiling, which I think is top 10 team in America once again, and make a deep tournament run, possibly be a national title contender when it's all said and done, they're going to need Dylan Mitchell primarily to figure out how to shoot.
Yeah, exactly. In my personal opinion, I think in certain situations, the best lineup is probably going to be that small ball lineup with Mitchell and Dessou paired together, which is what makes your point so interesting. Is if those two guys can give you 30% from three on just like 3 or 4 attempts, nothing crazy, that would be huge for this team. Because then you go to that lineup, and I think those two guys are good enough to protect the basket for the most part, outside of when you play like Zach Edey or something. That would be the only situation where maybe that lineup wouldn't really work. But outside of that, that lineup can get the job done defensively, and then offensively, you're going to get out and run and play fast.
Yeah. That's what Texas showed last year. They were a team that were hard-nosed defensively, even after Chris Beard left the program. They had more lapses defensively once that whole situation was resolved and Chris Beard is now at Ole Miss. Excuse me. But they were good enough because their offense was so good. Their offense found a rhythm eventually under Rodney Terry, and you have to give Terry credit for that. This offense looked as good as it's ever looked at points in times last year. I mean, they were putting up 90 plus on Kansas at the end of the season. Your point is absolutely 100% correct. I 100% agree, but you can see why, if you just think about it in your mind, the reason why they bring in a guy like Caden Shedrick from Virginia. Think about what Kansas got. Hunter Dickinson, the all-American big man from Michigan, who's basically kind of a do-it-all big that can shoot a little bit. Is kind of Zach Edey, that is a little bit of a better shooter from three, but not as big and not as dominant on the interior. You got to have someone who can match up with him on the interior and bang bodies, that sort of thing. Not that Dylan DeSue nor Dylan Mitchell can't do that, but that's what Shedrick is there for. You also brought in some other transfers. We're not going to deep dive into that too much. I'll get into this again before the season starts. But I guess the other thing that I wanted to talk about is we kind of addressed the front court is the backcourt. We know what Texas had in the backcourt last year with Carr, Hunter, Serge Rice. We know they had, Timmy Allen. I mean, we know what they had. Shot creators everywhere, right? Some of those found their rhythm later than others, but I mean, they had a guy off the bench that was a sniper from three and just big game, clutch, made plays all over the court, even defensively. Just a winner in Serge Rice, who is now in the San Antonio Spurs organization. Marcus Carr, who was the leading scorer for this team and played really well last year, averaged 16 points per game, had his moments throughout the NCAA tournament. Timmy Allen, who just an excellent human being and a solid college basketball player, averaged almost 11 points per game last year. Christian Bishop, who was kind of that, guy who did the dirty work on the interior, had some big games at Texas. We all know what these guys were. This year, you're going to have Max Abmas, who I think is the current active leader in scoring in college basketball for his career. Go watch this dude's highlights at Oral Roberts. He's do-it-all point guard, one of the best point guards in the country. There's a reason that Oral Roberts was in the tournament the past couple of years. Abmas wasn't the only reason, but he's a big reason. And he comes to Texas to pair with Tyrese Hunter. And it's an interesting dynamic. Tyrese Hunter, he shoots a lot of threes. He's not the most efficient. I think, they're going to be paired together. Hunter's going to be asked to move into a bigger role with the departures of Marcus Carr and Serge Rice. I think last year, after what was a stellar freshman year at Iowa State, he got lost in the shuffle a little bit, dealt with some injuries, but he's now the junior, and he's going to be asked to lead this team. So they're two really, really good, tough, cerebral players. They're experienced. They've been in the NCAA tournament before. You bring in guys like Ithiel Horton to play valuable minutes. He's probably one of the better shooters on this Texas team. He might be able to play a similar role to what Serge Rice provided last year, just in terms of that shooting off the bench. But I think it'll be an interesting dynamic. I want to see how Hunter and Abmas work off each other. So we don't need to dive too much deeper than that, but I think it'll still be one of the better backcourts in the country.
Yeah, I agree. The one thing you could probably point to and maybe ask questions is probably the size factor of things. Maybe a bigger backcourt where you're playing probably not the most current example in the world, but a Jalen Brunson type who's not afraid to post you up a little bit as a guard. That might come up here and there as a problem, but I think that Texas has the guys on the interior to help in those situations. So it's not too big of an issue, in my opinion.
Right. And again, I'm going to get into this more before the season. We're going to have shows that have to do with mainly college basketball once the season starts. And before Texas's first game, I'll come on again and readdress some of this stuff. But since we're 30 minutes in, any last thoughts right now, as we're about 2.5, 3 weeks, I think, from kicking off the college basketball season for Texas?
Well, I'll just ask you this: what would you say would be a success in the in terms of Big 12 play, like in terms of where they finish, and what would be a disappointment in your opinion? I think they should probably be in the hunt for second, third most of the year, in my opinion. Anything below that, and that's where you kind of get into that disappointment zone.
I think in terms of Big 12 record in league play, if you get to 10, 11 wins minimum in league play, that's good. That's good in the Big 12. Um, Last year they had 12. I mean, it's hard to expect 12 wins every year in the Big 12 because it's just so hard. I think they're going to be able to. It'll be a disappointment. I think they might have to play UConn, and they're going to have to go on the road and play Marquette, for sure in non-conference. Those won't be easy. But if they come out of non-conference with more than one loss, that's a disappointment. If you look at their schedule, in my opinion. Last year, we know, I mean, it was Gonzaga and Creighton, and there was one more team in there. It was nuts last year. Their non-conference schedule, they lightened it up this year because they knew, oh, Houston's added to the conference now. UCF,
Yeah,
which has a solid team, is added to this conference. BYU, Cincinnati, like we got to play those teams now, along with Texas Tech, Baylor, uh, Kansas,
Kansas,
Houston,
K State.
K-State with Jerome Tang, which is a team we might talk about on one of these shows. So I think definitely in terms of it's hard to project finish, but I think anything inside the top four of the Big 12 regular season would be a success for this team in the first full year under Rodney Terry. Remember, the criticisms, and this is the last thing I'll say about Rodney Terry, and fair enough, were okay, well, he inherited Chris Beard's team. Um, can he, year after year, go recruit high school kids? Can he dig into the transfer portal and pull in the right guys like Beard was able to do and has done for much of his career and got into a national championship game? Um, can he do that year after year? And that's the big question. And this was the first full offseason for Rodney Terry as the head coach at Texas. This will be his first full season. He didn't coach for much of the non-conference slate, if you guys remember. He kind of was named the interim head coach right before Big 12 play began. So, yeah, it'll be interesting. We will see, but I definitely think, and I think the national media would agree, like top four for Texas should be the expectation in the Big 12.
Yeah,
So
I agree.
I'm really excited for this. Okay. I want to have a conversation about, and I wanted to do like three biggest challenges, but I don't want to put a number on it. I don't want to put any restrictions on this conversation. And if this conversation goes longer than we need it to, so be it. We'll move the power rankings to Friday's show or
All
Thursday's
right.
show, whenever we need to do it. The question, though, is because I think there are a lot of different angles we could hit this from. What are the biggest challenges now that we're in game week for Houston? Texas is playing at Houston this weekend at, I believe it's 2:30 on Fox. What are the biggest challenges, issues facing Texas football and this team, which sits at 5-1, for the last 6 games of the regular season? Where do you want to start? Like, what comes to your mind?
The
It can be.
first things that Well,
Go
the,
ahead.
the first thing that comes into my mind is health, first and foremost. I think, particularly, um, I guess, at the center spot, for one, where we were fall into our third string guy midway through that Oklahoma game, and then in the secondary as well. Um, Losing Jalen Catalon, losing Ryan Watts, Texas is going to need those guys back as soon as possible.
Yeah, the obvious one's health, right? And
Right.
we don't even know. I mean, they could lose another key player, another key contributor down the stretch. The good thing is, I believe Sark said that everyone practiced as of yesterday. Not Jake Majors, he's going to be out a while, and that's the big one. But at the center spot, that's one of the issues we'll talk about more extensively here in a minute. But Ryan Watts should be back this week, which would be good for that secondary. um, and I don't know the exact status of Jalen Catalon. If you watch Sark's press conferences, he's, and rightfully so, I mean, it's his right as a head coach. He's very, very vague when giving injury updates. He rarely gives too much information, like detailed updates on injuries and statuses of players like Jatavion Sanders. Where is his health at? He was clearly not himself in the Oklahoma game. I think that's a ball he probably catches in the red zone if he's fully healthy. I think we see him on the field more. Uh, why were they throwing to Gunnar Helm? No disrespect to Gunnar Helm. I mean, he's a really solid college football player as the second tight end to Jatavion Sanders. But on that, I think it was on the drive after they pull off the fake punt, on that drive where I think they eventually stalled out in the red zone, where Savion Red comes into the ball game and he throws that little wildcat pass down the seam to Gunnar Helm for a big play to get them in the red zone. Why wasn't Jatavion Sanders in that position? I think Jatavion Sanders, his athleticism may have taken that ball to the house. But I think that clearly tells us something about where Jatavion Sanders' health was at that moment in time and what his status was. Just because he played that day and was able to give it a go doesn't mean he was necessarily fully healthy. So I think, and we saw it in the second half, they didn't really use him much in the second half. It was mainly Xavier Worthy and others. So I think, you know, that's interesting. Like, Sark doesn't usually give detailed updates on injuries. So by Thursday, we'll have a better idea on where guys stand in terms of their participation for this upcoming week against Houston. I don't think it's going to matter as much against Houston this week, whether or not they have, say, Jalen Catalon against Houston as much as it did against Oklahoma. But I do think there is, let me just put it this way, since everyone has practiced, aside from Jake Majors, who's probably going to be out 4 or 5 weeks at the very least, which is unfortunate. I think Catalan will be back, if not this week, next week. I think Watts will be back this week. I think Sanders will probably be back to fully healthy, if I had to guess, after a full 2 weeks of rest. So we don't know. I think as long as number 3 behind center doesn't get hurt, Texas will be fine against most of these teams. They have the talent advantage over everybody. They just have to be ready to play, and they can't become complacent. That's the issue.
Definitely. Yeah. The next thing is the red zone. We addressed this on our, Red River rivalry takeaways, that the fact that we were outscored 34-3 in the red zone that game as well. That's concerning, but I think more than that, Sarkisian if you look into like his numbers in the red zone as a play caller, they haven't been particularly good throughout his career. So I'm not saying it's something that we should panic about. Definitely not. This team has the talent to where against most defenses, you can just run it straight at them. It just so happened that Oklahoma that day, I think they knew Texas wanted to do that and they were ready for it. So the hope is you can get a little bit more creative down there in the red zone with some RPOs or something of that nature.
Yeah, I had red zone play calling and excuse me, red zone play calling and execution written down. This is a big one because if you look at the first half of the season with the data that we have, and again, as Josh Pate says, data, it's good for telling us what has happened. It might not be the best predictor of the future, which I agree with. But I mean, you're right. There is a large sample size throughout Sark's play calling, head coach play calling career that he's not. His numbers inside the red zone are not the greatest. It does the numbers inside the red zone throughout Sark's career aren't conducive to being the elite of the elite offense, one of the elite offenses, right? They need to be better down there. They're 70th in the country in red zone scoring percentage. They're scoring touchdowns on just 46% of their red zone visits. That's not going to cut it. I mean, you might be able to get away with that against Houston. You might be able to get away with it against BYU. You might even be able to get away with it against TCU, Iowa State, Texas Tech. I mean, Texas Tech is down to a third string quarterback. K-State is now playing their second string quarterback. Texas has they're going to have their main advantage is going to be in the trenches these next 6 games. But that's not going to cut it. If you want to be a championship caliber team, which is the expectation in terms of the Big 12 and maybe beyond that, 46% scoring touchdowns in the red zone. I mean, Washington's way better than that. Ohio State's way better than that. Georgia's way better than that. Michigan's way better than that. Like a lot of the teams that you look at in the AP, Oklahoma is way better than that. It's not gonna be good enough. And it's not just play. It's not just play calling it. The players have to execute as well.
Definitely, yeah. Just some detail stuff as well, like missing a down block or just the throw being a little too high and then it getting tipped up. Just the little stuff like that, you can't get away with it as much in the red zone because it's so condensed. I think in the red zone, the big thing for me is you want to see some like variety and also when it comes down to it, like on third down, attack a matchup. Like you have Xavier Worthy, you have this great receiving core. Just attack a matchup. I don't want to see like the halfback toss because you're kind of putting too much, stress on a wide receiver making a crackdown block against a defensive end to get the edge. I think I would feel a lot more comfortable betting on Jordan Winnington or Jatavion Sanders to win a 50-50 ball.
Yeah, and we all know about the red zone struggles. The numbers will probably be better in the second half. The first half of that schedule wasn't a cupcake. Like
Yeah,
Wyoming's a good team. Bama's top 12. We talked about them on our last episode. We obviously know what Oklahoma seems to be right now. They look like they could be a college football playoff team if they were to run the table and beat someone again in the Big 12 championship. They could possibly make it in. They're certainly a formidable top 10 team in the country in year 2 under Brent Venables. Kansas, even though they lost last week, they've been a top 25 caliber team throughout the course of the season without Jalen Daniels. And if they had Jalen Daniels, I'm convinced they still would be. So they beat Kansas, they beat Wyoming. They struggled a little bit against Rice, but that was the opening game of the season. They kind of ripped them to shreds in the second half. So that's been another thing with Texas is like they haven't been in their home games this year. It's been kind of a struggle to figure things out offensively in the first half. It's been weird. There's no real rhyme or reason to explain it. You'd like to see that get better because I do think there will be some challenges to come into DKR, particularly K-State in a couple weeks. They're not a very good team like they were last year, but they still are like they could be one of the bigger challengers you have left on your schedule. And Chris Kleiman's an excellent coach, so they will get up for that game. And so if you start slow in one of these games and you allow a team in purple to hang around, we've seen that story too many times. Just saying, like I'd like to see the offense start faster in a lot of these games, home or on the road. And I've had a problem with some of the personnel decisions that this coaching staff makes. I don't want to put it all on Sark because I don't ultimately know what goes into, and I will never know what goes into the in-game decisions with personnel in the flow of a football game with a college coaching staff. Like, I don't want to pin it on one guy because we don't know for sure, but it kind of feels like to me like why is CJ Baxter getting almost as many carries as Jonathan Brooks is at this point? Like Jonathan Brooks is on pace for a 1,500, 1,600 first team All-American, best running back in the country award season. Like he's been your hot hand at the running back position. It's no slight at CJ Baxter. Like he is the future, and I understand why Sark has to put him on the field. But especially in a one-score game like it was for, in the late in the second half last week against Oklahoma, you got to have your best player out there. And to me, I think they need to use Jonte Cook more. Now, the thing I do like with Sark is he stays consistent with what he believes. He's always had his guys at wide receiver, and those guys don't come off the field. Like he picks his guys, and those guys rarely come off the field. Like Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, and Jordan Whittington, Jatavion Sanders, if they're healthy, are mostly all the time on the football field. You rarely see Isaiah Nair or Jonte Cook or Ryan Niblett or the other talented receivers that Texas has at their disposal get into the game. I would like to see Jonte Cook more, though. I think you could use him in some of these big spots. And I think it's hurting a little bit. Like, that's going to hurt recruiting a little bit. If these other 5-star wide receivers see that, oh, well, Jonte Cook is, he's a 5-star freshman. He's one of the best freshman wide receivers to, in the 2023 recruiting class. He's at Texas with Sark, and he's not even getting to play in his true freshman year, or rarely getting on the field with exception of maybe a snap or two a game. Like, why should I go there when there's no guarantee that I'm going to play right away? So nothing's ever going to be detrimental to recruiting at Texas, because if Texas wins, things will take care of themselves. But point being is like I think in some situations this coaching staff could do a better job of putting the right guys in the best situations. Like use Jonathan Brooks. Please use him more than CJ Baxter. Don't split the carries just because you want to.
Yeah. I hear you there, definitely. I think on that front, it's probably more about keeping him fresh than anything, I guess. But even then, in a game against Oklahoma where you're kind of just like it's going to be a battle from start to finish, um, you kind of just have to take the leashes off at that point, especially in the fourth quarter. So I hear you there. You're definitely right on that point. Um, some of the other things you addressed, there's a lot there. Uh,
I have one more thing that I wanted to get into before we wrap up this conversation, but go ahead and make whatever comes to your mind, whatever points you have.
well, I like I like the point you made about the wide receivers. I think at certain points in the game where you want to go into hurry up offense, and you're in like a 2 minute drill type situation, it helps a lot if those guys are fresh or just like um, at like the highest energy possible and not tired, because those types of drives are taxing. And I think late in a ball game when there's like 80, 90 plays, and in a game like against Oklahoma, sometimes it gets up to like 110 plays if they're throwing a lot. But I don't know. I think you could use the extra scouting the other team would have to do to prepare for some of those guys, because Jonte Cook and guys like that, they strike fear into the defense, no matter whether a freshman or not.
Yeah. And I think Jonte Cook, at any moment he's on the field, could take one to the house. Like he has that,
Yeah,
in my opinion, the Xavier Worthy type of ability to break one at any moment in time. So I think Sark did admit in one of his press conferences post Oklahoma that we would see a little bit more of Jonte Cook in the second half of the season, which I like. I just say use him as much as possible. Use him as much as you can. I understand his philosophy though. Like, of course you want to keep Xavier Worthy on the football field. Of course you want to keep A.D. Mitchell and the threat that he can be on the field. Of course you want to keep Jordan Whittington, who's like the exemplification of like a great story in college football with the injuries he's dealt with and how productive and the leadership that he provides and everything that comes with a kid like Jordan Whittington. Of course you want to give him the playing time that he needs in his last season in college football. Like for most of these guys, they're going to the NFL. I get why Sark wants to play these guys, but you can find 10 plays in a ball game for Jonte Cook, put him on the field. Like, we've yet to see the explosion of offense that we thought we might get at the beginning of the season from Texas. Like there's
yeah,
still a really good offense, but we've yet to see like they're not on the Washington level. They're not on USC's level even. Uh, Despite some of the struggles USC is going through right now. They're not on a Michigan level even right now with the way JJ McCarthy's been playing. Even though Michigan, you could make the argument, has been playing lesser competition. Like I'd like to see them have some more 40, maybe even 50-point explosions in some of these games. Like they should blow the doors off of some of these teams in the second half of the season.
yeah.
Yeah,
Everything looks hard offensively. Like to your point, like everything looks like like a struggle almost. Like even though it's productive and you're moving the football, nothing feels easy, and that's, I mean, it's not concerning. It's just it's more of a nitpick than anything. But um, like you said, there's definitely another level this team can go to.
Yeah, there's another level this team can definitely go to throughout a football game offensively. And if you're Sark, it's all gas, no brakes, right? Like you got to stick to that. Like it should be, we get the ball, we're scoring a touchdown on this drive. We get the ball, we're scoring another touchdown on this drive, or we're at least going to, we're going to do our best to do so. And, so far for Texas, I think a lot of those touchdowns have come outside the red zone because there's no way they would be scoring, 37 points per game still with their struggles in the red zone. Like if all their possessions ended up in the red zone, the way that they're scoring in the red zone, there's no way they'd be averaging close to 30 points per game plus. So they do have that ability. It's not I think Stark's an excellent play caller. Remember the article from The Athletic from a couple weeks ago, where the one of the anonymous coaches said like Sark's one of the best play callers I've ever faced. Like if his peers are saying that, and those like we know football, but they know more than we do. Like they just do. They're coaches. They have a lot more information than we do. I do think Sark's an excellent play caller. I would agree with those guys, but sometimes I feel like he goes away from that all gas no brakes motto a little bit, and sometimes it hurts Texas. Now, in the Alabama game, when they took the ball with about 7 minutes left and just kept running the ball and running the ball, and they just ran out the clock, like they were able to not even give the ball back to Alabama, that's a different conversation, right? That was more, okay, we're getting this ball. We're not going to give it back to them. We see that we're dominating the line of scrimmage and we're going to run this football. We're going to pick up a couple first downs and the game's going to be over. But I think I could go on and on about this conversation. Maybe we just need to save some of it for another time. I do think, though, the play calling aspect of it takes away from Sark's ability a little bit to do the other things that are required of
Yeah,
the head
yeah.
coach.
That was a point that I was going to make to close this segment. Is when we were talking about the clock management stuff in the fourth quarter last week, it kind of just made you feel like maybe like Sark's getting into his like offensive coordinator hat too much when he's getting into these play calling zones, I guess. And part of you just thinks maybe Sark needs to find a guy he can trust and give the play calling duties to him, and have him, and then have Sark be more of a CEO type, I guess. But it's hard to do that because Sark is such a good play caller, but it is definitely something to think about.
Something to think about. It's not a change I think they'd make middle of the season.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely not.
One of the things people have to remember, though, is one of the reasons Texas hired Sark was for him to be the head coach and the play caller. And whether or not they considered the issues that might come with that, uh, that's a different story. I think if Texas handles their business, there shouldn't be many, if any, close games in the fourth quarter. There's probably going to be one. Like, as a Texas fan, at TCU could be an interesting spot. There's probably
Yeah,
going to be one of these games that is closer down the stretch in the fourth quarter, in the second half. Maybe even two of these games that Texas hopefully can figure out a way to win still. But that's when we'll really key in on not only the play calling aspect, but particularly the clock management aspect and the game management aspect that we addressed extensively in our post OU episode. So it's certainly something. The other option is like you've hired these analysts, Paul Christ, who's an excellent coach, long time at Wisconsin. He knows offense. He was kind of the Gary Patterson hire of this year. Like last year, it was Gary Patterson on the defensive side. This year, it's Paul Christ on the offensive side. Like, why not you hand some of he's upstairs, like he's in Sark's ear. Why not you have him help you with some of these decisions late in game? That's another option. Sark focuses on play calling. Paul Christ helps me with timeouts and, when to run the ball, when to throw the ball, how to deal with this situation. Like in those closer games, it's certainly something to watch. That would be more of a Band-Aid solution, like in the middle of a season, more so than a holistic change to your philosophy. Because I do not think that Sark came to Texas thinking that he was not going to be the play caller for this team. Like it's his offense. Like
it becomes an ego thing at that point.
He's going to call the play. So, and especially if Texas does what they're supposed to do, and say they end up 11-1, and they're in the Big 12 championship game, Sark's just going to say like, well, I got 11-win season, Big 12 championship. Seems like it's working to me. Give me that second contract, like right or wrong. That's what he's going to say. And he has a right to say that. So that's stuff that we can talk about at the end of the season. Texas has 6 games in front of them. It starts with Houston this weekend. There are things that we talked about that we'll be watching for. Some of these games hopefully will be over by the start of the third quarter, or by the middle of the third quarter at least, to where Texas can maybe work in some more of Malik Murphy. I'm not sure we'll see Arch Manning at all this year, which could be of disappointment to some, but I think it's a full redshirt year for him, unfortunately. So just win this weekend and look good doing it. That's what I ask of Texas. And they should be able to do that. And it shouldn't be that hard. Like, this team has been sitting on that OU loss for almost two weeks now. Like, come Saturday, it will be 2 weeks. Like, must be brutal as a player. Like, waiting 2 weeks after that heated rivalry, after losing in that fashion.
Yeah.
You want to get that bad taste out of your mouth. I do think Texas will take care of business in this football game this upcoming weekend. Although I think Houston could put up a scrap the first quarter and a half. We'll see where that goes. I want to see the Texas defense come out and look the way they did the previous 5 games prior to Oklahoma. I want to see that Oklahoma game was more of a, what do you call it? An
anomaly, flash in the pan.
Yeah, anomaly, flash in the pan, like one bad game, whatever. We'll put that in our rear view more so than maybe a trend that develops over the course of the second half of the season, which would not be good for this football team. It should be an interesting second half, and we'll be covering all of it. So I still had this weird cough. I'm gonna take some of this gosh, what do they call it? Not Tamiflu. I don't have the flu.
NyQuil,
No. Um,
cough drops.
yeah, I have those, but Jesus, I can't think of the name. Right when I want it, I can't have it. You know,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
it's
I hear you.
frustrating. Whatever. I'm gonna go take some of that medicine, whatever it's called. Um, I'd love to do the top 10 power rankings if you really want to. um, but we're already at an hour 5 minutes. So what do you want to do?
Um, I think it depends on whether like you want to stick with it being 10. Because we could do it right now if you want to cut it down to like 5 or 6.
I like 10. What we
Yeah,
can
I
do
think so
though,
too.
what we can do right now though is let's talk about let's not this is a let's not give any hints as to what our top 10 is going to look like on Thursday or Friday, but let's talk about teams that could find themselves in the top 10 but could also find themselves right outside the top 10. Like who are those group of fringe teams right now? You probably know inside your head right now like who's definitely going to be in there for you, and I do for me. But it gets interesting towards that 8, 9, and 10 spot in the order you put those teams in. And also, there are some teams right out, like in the 10 to 15 range, that you could also make an argument for. So let's talk. Let's have a conversation for 5 or 10 minutes on who some of those teams could be. The first team that comes to mind for me that I've been going sort of back and forth on lately is North Carolina.
Yeah, that was the team for me as well. Just because they have the upside at quarterback. It feels like Mac Brown has this defense just playing fast. Like maybe they don't have the SEC athletes that some other programs do, but it hasn't mattered so far. And it looks like they have a pretty good track to
Yep.
get to the ACC championship. And if they win that game, like, can you really keep them out of the playoff at that point?
Yeah. They have Drake May, who will be a top 5 draft pick. This week they got back Tez Walker, their transfer wide receiver, who was originally inexplicably uneligible to start the year due to some transfer waiver issues that Josh Pate spoke extensively about on his show and wasn't happy about. And
No,
nobody
nobody was.
was. But Pate put it so eloquently. Did you see what he did against Miami, though? Like 3 touchdowns, 135 yards on 6 receptions. Like, that's scary. You add
No,
that element to the North Carolina offense with what they have. You know, they lost a guy like Josh Downs last year to the NFL draft. They bring in Tez Walker. They finally get him eligible. They're able to run the football. They have Drake May, who's kind of the equalizer against most teams that they're going to play. Uh, if they can get to that level of competing for a national championship, and their defense is much improved. They're able to get more of a pass rush this year. They're better up front. Uh, they're stopping the run better. They're still not perfect defensively, but last year they were horrendous. And this year
yeah,
they're actually on the verge of actually being good. Like they're a good defense. They're opportunistic. They can take away the ball. Um, North Carolina is a really good team, and they're the second half of their schedule sets up really well. They don't they don't have to play Florida State in the regular season. They already beat Miami. Uh, they do have to play Clemson, I believe, but they can beat Clemson. I don't think Clemson is at that level this year. I think North Carolina could beat Clemson if they get past that game. I don't know if they have to play Louisville. Louisville's a pretty good team this year. They beat Notre Dame. They're, I believe, 6-1. I'm not sure if they have to play them, but you're right. There's a clear path for this very good North Carolina team with an excellent quarterback to get to the ACC championship game undefeated, and possibly if they win that, go on to the playoff. Absolutely could happen. Are there any other teams on your mind?
Um,
I mean,
to me,
Alabama.
it's like, where do you
Alabama.
put USC? Where do you put Alabama? Yeah,
Yeah.
those are the big ones.
Yeah, I mean, I've been going
Yeah.
back and forth on Alabama too. The thing is like, if you value what's happened on the football field for this year, you can't put them ahead of Texas necessarily because Texas beat them. But also, what do you do with Alabama and North Carolina? Because you can make an argument that Alabama's, they beat Ole Miss, beat in Arkansas. They're playing an SEC. It's weird. Like the dynamics of strength and schedule and all these sorts of things, but North Carolina just looks better offensively. They're playing good defensively. So if you do put Alabama into that top 10, it's probably at 10, and you're probably putting North Carolina ahead of them, or are you? Like, these are the questions that you have to answer. I don't know where I put USC after last week. I mean, where how far do you drop Oregon, if at all, after last week? Because I thought they mostly outplayed Washington in the second half of that game, but we all know people are going to nitpick Dan Lanning's decisions, in that game, and I mean that's for them to do. We could talk about that for a while if we wanted to. Who's in your top four? Like, we know probably Michigan, Georgia. Do you possibly put Michigan ahead of Georgia? Like, these are just some of the questions that we're going to answer for ourselves in our opinions on Thursday or Friday. So make sure you tune in.
Yeah, I think I would even consider Washington up there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to.
Which, yeah, yeah.
Any,
The weird one is Notre Dame, just because they lost to Louisville. They have that second loss, but man, I mean, they're just as good a football team as any of those teams. Which I think that's what sucks about the 12-team playoff not showing up yet this year. A team like Notre Dame would still have a fighting chance just because of how hard that schedule was, in terms of getting into a 12 teams playoff. But now, with it being a 4-team playoff, their season's pretty much done in terms of that.
goodness gracious. We're going to wrap this thing up. You're absolutely right. But ESPN update 1 minute ago. Kyle Schwarber blasts 2 home runs. Phillies win 10-0 game 2.
Holy. Okay. Aaron Nola pitching, I'm guessing?
6 shutout innings from Aaron Nola.
Oof. Yeah. Okay.
To me,
that's
I think I said this in the live stream. If I didn't, well, that's on me. To me, they just feel like
a team of destiny.
That, and they're just on a mission, and they're not going to be denied. It just feels like that to me. I mean, who's going to win in that place? Citizens Bank.
I mean, when your lineup is just on fire like they are right now, I mean, and then you have 2 stud pitchers that are going to pitch, 4 out of 7 games? I mean, at that point, it's just like, how do you beat them?
We'll see what happens. Games 3, 4, and 5 are in Arlington for Astros Rangers. The Rangers are up 2-0 in that series. Can't quite say the Astros are dead, but we will see. They've been a lot better on the road this year than they have at home. And then the Phillies up 2-0 on the D-backs, but the D-backs, that series is going back across the country to the desert. Can't help it, guys. Where they'll have 3, 4, and 5. So how many do the D-backs get? How many can the Astros get? Can they get the series back to Houston? These are all questions that will be answered over the next week or so before we get to the World Series. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in tonight. Again, we'll finish our power rankings, or we'll do our power rankings on Thursday or Friday, depending on which day we do episode 25 of Deep in the Heart of Longhorn Sports. I want to do a couple of game breakdowns, including that Penn State-Ohio State game, and then look at some prize picks for college football this upcoming weekend. So we'll be back with that. Tomorrow, I'm thinking we're probably going to have our bi-weekly power rankings for the National Football League. Love this episode. I've been thinking about my power rankings all week since Sunday. It's only Tuesday.
Yeah.
I act like that's been such a long time. And then we're going to have
Feels like it.
It does. And then we're going to have an NBA episode sometime, if not tomorrow, Thursday, Friday. We don't know yet. Okay, so thank you guys for tuning in. We'll be back 2 or 3 more times this week, so make sure you guys tune in. Make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you guys next time. Hook 'em horns, and peace out.
Peace.
I hope this cough stops soon.
Yeah, just like the chances of Michael's cough going away.